Our family consists of 4 members, including our parents. Emily takes after our mom in terms of personality. She's friendly but can be a bit lazy at times. She enjoys teasing my dad and me, as we are more sincere individuals. When we were kids, our mom, who shares a similar temperament with Emily, had a soft spot for her. It was pretty clear that she favored Emily over me. Whenever she hung out with friends, it was always Emily who got to go, leaving me behind because, according to her, it's embarrassing to introduce plain and quiet Ashley to her friends. On the flip side, Mom was really proud of Emily, who was outgoing and well-liked whenever they went out. Despite having a mom and sister like that, the reason I could stay positive was because of my dad. He appreciated my sincerity and loved both Emily and me equally. I cherished my dad's fair approach. Even as an adult, my mom's treatment of me didn't change much. Thankfully, my dad's presence kept our family balanced and stable. However, when my father retired at the age of 65, a mishap occurred at home. He stumbled over a small step, resulting in a broken bone. Despite his efforts with surgery and rehabilitation, his aging muscles didn't bounce back easily. As he spent more time confined to bed and in need of care, my mother and Emily grew colder towards him. "Hey, Mom, what do you think about this?" "Yeah, it looks good. The food seems delicious too. Maybe we should go with this one." While glancing at a guidebook, my mother and Emily excitedly discussed their plans. When I inquired about their conversation, my mother replied with a hint of irritation. They were organizing a family trip, but considering Dad's mobility challenges, I pointed out that traveling might be tough for him. In response to my comment, Emily said with a smile, "Well, we're not planning to bring him in the first place. We intend to leave him at home. That's cruel. It would be tough for him if he's left alone." "If Dad's not coming, I'll stay home with him," I declared. After expressing this, my mother and Emily exchanged smiles. Following that, my mother stated, "That's fine too. If that's the case, Emily and I will just go by ourselves. Whether you two come or not is up to you. But since it's a family trip, we'll be using money from Dad's bank account." A quick look at the guidebook revealed they had chosen a room meant for only 2 people. It was evident they never intended to bring my father or me along. Following that, my mother and Emily frequently ventured out on their own, staying at upscale inns and dining at renowned restaurants. It felt as if neither my father nor I existed in the house. I observed their actions from a distance, working diligently to complete my tasks quickly to attend to my father. When I couldn't manage everything alone, I sought assistance from care services for tasks like bathing and accompanying my father on short walks around the neighborhood. On days when I had to work late, I asked my mother and Emily to look after my father. However, they avoided the responsibility. "Ashley, I came to help with the bath, but is there no one at home today?" Upon receiving a notification from the care service staff, I promptly called my mother and Emily. Despite informing them of the staff's visit in advance, they had left my father alone and gone out. When they finally returned home, I confronted them, but there was no apology. The staff are professionals, right? It's okay even if we aren't there. Dad is an adult. He'll be fine being left alone. We don't want our time taken up caring for him like you. It seemed they genuinely believed they were doing nothing wrong. Realizing I couldn't rely on them, I decided that taking care of my father was my responsibility. I juggled work and caregiving. The daily grind was far from easy, especially since neither my mother nor Emily showed any concern or understanding. As the days passed, my father's condition worsened. He spent more time seated than walking and ate much less. Approaching the 9th year of caring for my father, I grew worried about his frail appearance. When I took him to the hospital, a shocking diagnosis awaited me. "Your father has advanced cancer. It can't be." Realizing that our time with him might be limited, I was determined to support him in his final days. I made the difficult decision to quit my job and become his full-time caregiver. I knew I had to share this with my mother and Emily. Their reactions were quite unexpected. When I told them about his condition, my mother remarked, Really? He never drank or smoked. It's unfortunate that such a sincere person ended up with cancer. Emily, looking stunned, said, I can't believe you give up your job to take care of Dad. I'd never make that choice. I expected them to be concerned about him, but there was no sign of it. Their indifference surprised me, as if it was someone else's problem. In the end, they only visited him briefly in the hospital and never made a proper visit. I provided daily support during his chemotherapy treatments. Despite our efforts, the cancer continued to progress, and 6 months later, he passed away. The days following the diagnosis were a blur. Upon learning of his death, my mother and Emily had a private discussion and left me to organize the funeral alone. Then they disappeared somewhere. I didn't even have the time to mourn my father, as I had to handle the funeral arrangements alone. As the funeral commenced, my mother took the stage to deliver the chief mourner's speech, despite not having contributed much. She put on a public face, irritating me, but the funeral proceeded smoothly. Exhausted as I returned home, my mother and Emily, who had already arrived, invited me to the living room, claiming they had something to discuss. Without considering my fatigue, my mother abruptly announced, regarding your father's inheritance, Emily and I will inherit this house and all other assets. Honestly, I wasn't in the mood to discuss inheritance on the very day my father passed away. However, Emily chimed in, we even have a proper will. Look. She proudly presented a document and began to explain, right after Dad was admitted to the hospital, Mom and I visited him and had him sign this. It states that you won't inherit anything. Dad agreed to it immediately. With a smirk, Emily said, after all the help you provided, it's so cold, right? Maybe Dad, in the end, preferred me over his 2 serious elder daughters. That's impossible. Before I could respond, my mother interrupted with an inappropriate grin. Clearly, Emily is more adorable, though. Your father always stayed home and had no hobbies. He surely saved a lot, right, Mom? Even quit her job because of the inheritance, and I took some time off work to enjoy the inheritance for a while. Without allowing me to say anything, they continued their conversation. My mother then informed me, you, who have no job, won't get a penny from the inheritance. We plan to enjoy a vacation abroad for a while, so you should leave this place by then. Hurriedly, I countered, wait a minute. Do you genuinely believe what you're doing is right? Without waiting for me to finish, both my mother and Emily firmly responded, shut your mouth. It's a waste of time trying to take the inheritance from us. With your father gone, we'll do as we please. Your role here is done. Please leave this house promptly. To think that after all you sacrificed for Dad, this is what you get. There was no need to go to such lengths for such an inept father. It's pointless to regret and think about it now. Upon hearing those words, any remaining bond I felt for my mother and Emily was completely severed. I couldn't forgive them for speaking that way about my beloved father. Holding back what I wanted to say, I calmly told them, I understand your thoughts. From now on, I can't imagine living together with you two. I'll gladly leave. Despite their initial surprise at my acceptance, the two soon smiled smugly together. Good to know. Once you leave this house, never rely on us again. Our relationship ends here. Whatever happens to you, we want no part in it. Don't even think of contacting us. Receiving this intense sentiment from my mother, I packed only my essentials and left the house. A few days after the inheritance discussion, something unexpected happened. I received a call from my mother, the same person who claimed she would cut off contact with me. When I answered, she immediately confronted me in anger. What have you done? Where has all the money from your father's account gone? Why are you suddenly calling? Didn't you say you wouldn't contact me? Silence. This is an emergency. Return your father's savings immediately. What are you talking about? I left the passbook at the old house, didn't I? I have no way of accessing it after I left, but the money in the account is definitely gone. Such a significant amount of his savings couldn't have disappeared so suddenly. I found it suspicious. Moving out swiftly without securing a job seemed to have led my mother to assume that I had mismanaged my father's money. Mom, Haven't you ever checked the account balance before? Huh? I haven't bothered with such things. I see. If you had, you would have noticed that Dad's savings weren't that much to begin with. What do you mean his savings were? Oh, where did his retirement money go? Oh, we used it for our wedding ceremony and the new house. Wedding? New house? I have no idea what you're talking about. I had been romantically involved with a man named Sean, who was responsible for the living service for my father. Our relationship started through our mutual care for my father. I informed my father about my relationship with Sean early on in our dating. When Sean proposed, I was overwhelmed with living and work responsibilities and couldn't make a decision. Upon learning the truth, my father said, "Care for yourself more than me. I want you to have a happy marriage," and he cheered me on. Despite my hesitations, he even started assisting with the wedding venue, selecting a new place to live, and looking for a new home. We had reserved a wedding date for the following year and signed a contract for a new apartment that my father liked. All of this occurred 6 months before we discovered his terminal cancer. As a gesture of gratitude, my father covered most of the costs for the wedding and the new apartment. That was the reason for the decrease in the account balance. Hearing the turn of events, my mother's voice trembled. She was clearly shaken. So there wasn't any inheritance for us to inherit in the first place, primarily just the family home. But given its location, we shouldn't expect the high selling price. Emily, having overheard the conversation, anxiously grabbed the phone from my mother. "Wait, so the financial assistance for your wedding is much more than the inheritance from Mom and me?" That seems to be the case. Dad knew about my marriage and me leaving the house. So maybe he didn't see a problem in leaving the family home to both of you. He might have used a significant amount for me and intended the inheritance to compensate for that. Could it be that the reason you quit your job was because your marriage had been decided upon? That's right. Sean is also involved in investment activities and is financially stable. He wanted me to become a full-time housewife. Also, I thought if I resigned early, I could focus on taking care of our father. I can't believe it. Why did you keep the news about your marriage and savings a secret from us? Taking a deep breath, I answered, "I thought about telling you several times, but every time, neither of you showed any interest and avoided the topic. Why didn't you stop me from taking a break from work or Mom from quitting her part-time job? How are we supposed to live now? When I wanted to talk to you after the funeral, wasn't it you and Mom who shut me down, saying, 'You can't expect anything from us'? But I thought family members should help each other out. When I was swamped with work and living, you were out having fun, neglecting Dad. How can I think of someone who said such mean things as family? Don't just say whatever is convenient for you." Shocked and speechless, Emily was caught off guard. Following that, my mother implored, "Ashley, the truth is, I've already paid for the trip. I'd also made various purchases, expecting the inheritance. So now I have no savings left. So what about it? I've already quit my part-time job, right? If we don't get any inheritance money, we won't have any money for next month. So until I find a new job, I hope you can lend us some. When you kicked me out of the family home, didn't you say you'd never come to me again, that our relationship was over, that you wouldn't interfere with whatever happens to me in the future? About that, neither of you ever helped when Dad and I were going through tough times. Now when you're in trouble, you want to rely on me. That's incredibly brazen. But if you don't help us now, what will we do?" Without waiting for my mother to finish, I ended the call and blocked their numbers. I was utterly disgusted by my mother and sister, who only claim to be family when they're in trouble. I decided to distance myself from these two. Later on, I heard from various people that although my mother and Emily had canceled their trip, since it was a last-minute cancellation, they couldn't get a refund. They've been barely scraping by, asking friends and relatives for money. They had to sell their house, but as I expected, they didn't get as much as they hoped. With the initial expenses for a new place and moving costs, they had hardly any money left. Emily returned to work, but because she asked her colleagues for money, her relationships at work became strained. She had planned to leave her job soon after finding a good partner, But because of the situation, that partner as well as other men distanced themselves. Her friends too. My mother tried to find another part-time job, but her previous workplace had already hired someone else, so it was hard for her to return. Due to her age, her job opportunities were limited. They managed their living expenses with my mother's meager part-time salary and Emily's earnings, slowly repaying their debts. Both of them seemed worn out. As for me, I was able to have a small wedding at the venue my father chose. The only regret is that my father couldn't be there for my wedding. But I believe he's watching over our happy moments from somewhere. My married life with Sean has been smoother than expected. We're enjoying peaceful and fulfilling days together. I'm eternally grateful to my father for supporting my relationship with Sean and giving me this opportunity. I've had to build a peaceful life with my husband, always remembering my gratitude to my father.
My name is Cindy, a 35-year-old office worker. I met my husband Joe through a colleague at work, sort of a blind date, and we ended up getting married. Joe and I are the same age and share similar hobbies, so I anticipated a joyful life together. Joe's parents were cheerful and kind. My mother-in-law once said, "We were worried because Joe hadn't brought home a single potential bride until now. Please take good care of Joe." Her words stung a bit, considering I'm his age too, but I chose to ignore it. A year has passed since our wedding. Though we sometimes argued, and Joe would often bring up divorce during those moments, I thought it was just part of married life. Despite this, we generally got along well. On weekends, we enjoyed driving and taking day trips, a hobby we had shared even before getting married. While I used to travel alone frequently, we now did everything as a couple. Joe lived with his parents until we got married, using their car when he went out. Since then, we've been using my car, which is nearing its end. I originally drove a compact car because I liked the design and rarely had passengers, but I was now considering buying a new one before the next inspection. When I discussed this with Joe, he agreed, saying, "It's your car, so do as you like. But if you're going to replace it, why not get a larger car instead of a compact?" I agreed with his suggestion. The following weekend, we went to look at cars together. As we began looking at cars, Joe grew increasingly excited. He pointed out an expensive model, praising its performance, spacious interior, and overall quality. Despite its appeal, I hesitated due to the high costs, which I hadn't planned for. Joe suggested, "How about I take out a loan in my name? We both drive about the same amount, and the payments would come from our household budget." Although it didn't matter who took the loan, his suggestion seemed practical, and we decided to explore that option. We looked at other cars, but we liked the first one best and decided on it. However, the loan application in Joe's name was denied, likely because he had just changed jobs. Joe became angry and snapped at the clerk, "I'm saying I'll buy it. Can't you do something about it?" This is one of the things I dislike about Joe. He often has a condescending attitude towards staff, no matter the store. When I tried to calm him down, he got upset and went outside to smoke. Joe can be domineering and quick to threaten divorce when things don't go his way, which is exhausting. I apologized profusely to the salesperson. Maybe it would be easier to get a loan for a smaller amount. If the car is cheaper, I could pay in full, I suggested while consulting with the salesperson. Just then, Joe returned. "Hey, why not buy it under Cindy's name? I'll be the one paying anyway," he said, leaving me to ponder the situation. Actually, I found Joe's suggestion appealing. None of the other cars resonated with me the same way. I nodded and signed the documents. They said it would take a few months for the car to be delivered. In the meantime, I drove around in my old car, cherishing our last moments together. One day, as my husband sat in the passenger seat, fiddling with his smartphone, he remarked, "Finally bidding farewell to this cramped space, huh?" During the drive, I let him take the wheel and casually glanced at his phone left on the dashboard. A message caught my eye. "Did you get a new car? And it's a luxury car at that." It was from one of Joe's colleagues. Joe seemed to be showing off our new car. Given his vanity, he likely hadn't mentioned that the car was purchased under my name. Though I thought it mattered, this car ultimately changed our fate. 3 months later, the first place we went in our newly delivered car was to my in-laws' house. We visited to celebrate my father-in-law's retirement, a visit my husband always emphasized as important to honor his parents. When my father-in-law greeted us, he excitedly examined the car and exclaimed, "So this is the new car. It's so cool," I suggested, Let's go out together in it next time, to which he responded with delight. My mother-in-law also chimed in. I want to go too. How about a spa trip? She seemed excited, so I started making plans, taking their wishes into account. At my in-laws, we had a wonderful time reminiscing about my father-in-law's work and my husband's childhood. One memorable comment from my mother-in-law was, I really wanted a daughter. I thought it would be fun to go out and share clothes with her, but instead, I gave birth to Big Joe. She then added, so Cindy, if you don't mind, let's go out together next time. I was thrilled. However, my husband didn't seem to find this amusing. Although my mother-in-law was only joking and hadn't implied he was unwanted, he sulked. Before we got married, I found his pouting cute, but it has become a bit annoying with how frequently it happens. Perhaps because his parents were present, my husband refrained from saying anything, but he often used the threat of divorce to manipulate me into compliance. Despite the tension, we managed to navigate the situation and returned home. The following day, after returning from work, my husband entered the living room and announced, the luxury car you bought will be a gift for my dad. If you disagree, we might as well divorce, right? Initially, I thought he was joking and tried to brush it off, but it became evident he was dead serious. Wait, why are you bringing this up now? I asked, puzzled. Dad was eyeing that car with envy. The best way to honor my parents' retirement is by gifting him that car and letting him enjoy it. He insisted firmly. I was taken aback by his sudden demand, but Joe remained adamant and refused to compromise. He's always been stubborn, and there are moments when he becomes irate if I don't go along with his wishes. Annoyed, I attempted to reason with him, saying, we agreed to spend time with your father together, didn't we? Giving the car as a gift is. But he wasn't open to discussion. The argument escalated, and Joe began to lose his temper. As their only son, I feel it's my duty to give something back to Mom and Dad. I want them to appreciate having a son, not a daughter. Joe seemed still affected by his mother's comment about wishing for a daughter. Perhaps he felt competitive after his mother expressed interest in going out with me. I was stunned. We couldn't possibly afford to give such an expensive gift. Why don't we plan a trip to a hot spring resort instead? We talked about this yesterday, didn't we? But Joe remained dissatisfied, glaring at me. I married you, a woman past her prime, didn't I? You have nothing to boast about. Do you even realize who is responsible for the life we're leading? Just once, listen to what I have to say. His harsh words chilled my feelings for Joe instantly. Past her prime, huh? I was aware of it, but hearing someone else say it was infuriating. After all, I managed the household chores, which put me in a better position than Joe, who couldn't do much around the house. Besides, I was also contributing financially, and our livelihood didn't depend solely on Joe's salary. With these thoughts, the aspects of Joe that grated on me began to surface. His treatment of waitstaff, his tendency to sulk, his stubbornness. I had tried to overlook these traits, but now they were starting to wear on me. As these thoughts churned in my mind, Joe left the room and returned with something in his hand. Ha! I exclaimed when he handed me divorce papers. As I looked up in surprise, he said, just sign the car ownership transfer document. If you're not okay with it, you can fill out the divorce papers and leave. It's up to you. To my disbelief, the divorce papers were already filled out. That's enough, I muttered, feeling fed up. Fine. As I signed the document, Joe nodded with satisfaction, casually discarding the divorce papers and retreating to his room. The next day, Joe handed me the necessary documents for the car's title transfer, asking, can we transfer the title even though we just took out a loan? I took the documents, pondering his question. To be certain, I decided to consult the dealership where we purchased the car. It turned out that transferring the title while a loan was still active posed significant challenges. Additionally, since the ownership change required my father-in-law's approval, it couldn't be the surprise gift Joe envisioned. Besides, my father-in-law had never expressed a desire for a car. I thought if I explained this to Joe, he might abandon the idea. I also explored the option of selling the car. Now that it felt tainted by our recent conflict, I wasn't sure if I wanted to keep driving it. The model was popular and production couldn't keep up with demand, so selling it could fetch a high price. With that money, I could pay off the loan and choose a new car that I truly liked. When I arrived home from work and explained to Joe the complications of changing the car's title due to the loan, he responded sharply, then we'll just have to buy another car. Dad will be thrilled for sure. I'm sorry, but Dad never expressed a desire for a car, I countered. Well, Then it looks like we're really going to get divorced, Joe muttered before storming off to his room. I reached my breaking point. I had been willing to work through things if he apologized, but I couldn't continue the marriage under these circumstances. I made the decision to pack my belongings. Simultaneously, I arranged to sell the car. The dealership offering the highest price agreed to collect it at a later date. A sense of relief washed over me. I planned to move out while Joe was at work the following week, putting an end to everything. With this resolve in mind, I finished my shift on Friday and returned home, only to find the car missing from its usual spot in the parking lot. What? I hurried inside to check if the car keys were still where I left them. They're gone. Panic set in as I dialed Joe's number repeatedly. Despite my efforts, he didn't answer, nor did he read my messages asking him to contact me. Did Joe take the car somewhere? But that car is already. 3 hours later, I finally received a message from him. He explained he was on a trip with a colleague and suggested we both needed time to cool down. What? I exclaimed involuntarily, my voice rising as I stared at my phone screen in frustration. If Joe was on a trip, it meant he wouldn't be back tonight. I wasted no time and swiftly set my plans into motion, plans I had carefully laid out over the past few days. I called a real estate agent I knew from work and finalized the lease on the apartment he had reserved for me. I also arranged for a moving company to relocate all my belongings, furniture, appliances, everything. By the next morning, the movers had efficiently packed and transported everything to my new place. By mid-afternoon, I had settled into my new life. With the weight lifted off my shoulders, I found myself dozing off. Suddenly, my phone rang, startling me awake. It was Joe calling. He must have returned home, discovered my absence, and was likely taken aback enough to call. I couldn't help but smirk a little as I answered the phone. "Cindy, can you help me?" Joe's voice came through the phone, frantic and alarmed. It was clear he wasn't at home. "I had an accident, and my insurance isn't covering it." Confused, I replied, "What?" Joe's frustration grew evident. "That's why the new car's insurance. I called them after the accident, but they're saying it's not covered." As I pieced together his words, realization dawned. "What do you mean you had an accident? Where are you? Are you hurt?" I asked, attempting to sound concerned despite my mixed emotions. It wasn't my fault. The other party wasn't paying attention. But more importantly, what about the insurance? Joe sighed heavily. "I thought I made myself clear, didn't I? I told you not to use the car for now, Joe. You said you understood it, right? So why did you take it out without asking? We agreed to let each other know when using the car separately. Does none of that matter now?" Cindy took over, calling the insurance company from my end. Hearing the word accident made me nervous, but if he had the energy to shout, it probably wasn't too serious. I calmly laid out the situation. The car was reported stolen. When I got home, it was gone, so I reported it to the police. In fact, it was scheduled to be sold today, and now you're telling me there's been an accident. What am I supposed to do? I canceled the insurance because the sale was finalized. I canceled it when I told you not to touch the car. Upon hearing this, my husband, or rather, my soon-to-be ex-husband, began to panic. "Whoa, wait a minute. Even if I was driving our car, it shouldn't be reported stolen, Cindy. Please withdraw the theft report first. I understand about the insurance. We can discuss the financials when I get back home." But I couldn't simply accept his words. "By the way, I almost forgot to mention, you and I are now strangers. I filed for divorce 3 days ago, and it's been approved. Also, I'm not living in that house anymore." He shouted these words over the phone, but I hung up anyway. After hanging up, his calls continued relentlessly, so I eventually turned off my phone to get some peace. The next day, I took a day off from work to organize my room. When I switched my phone back on in the morning, it was flooded with missed calls from my ex-husband. There was even a call around 1 a.m., likely when he returned home. But he was the one who hastily filed for divorce, and he was the one who used divorce as a threat. If he believed that mentioning divorce would make me comply with his demands, he was mistaken. Initially, when we first married, I might have given in to avoid the embarrassment of divorce so soon after tying the knot at 35. Perhaps that's why he assumed I would comply again. However, as I sorted through my room and reflected on everything, all those pent-up frustrations finally pushed me past my hesitations. My phone rang again. Assuming it was my ex-husband, I checked, only to see it was a call from my mother-in-law. I received a call from Joe yesterday. He mentioned something about an accident and you leaving, but I couldn't make sense of it. "What's going on?" she asked, concerned. I took a deep breath and explained everything to her. "I apologize to you and father-in-law, but the divorce is final. Regarding the money for the car and dividing our belongings, I'm planning to arrange a meeting to discuss it soon." Upon hearing this, my mother-in-law apologized profusely and said, "If it's all right with you, could I attend that meeting?" I'm worried Joe might say something unreasonable. I agreed to hold the post-divorce meeting at my in-laws' house. When I visited my in-laws after a long while, I found my father-in-law scolding my ex-husband. My mother-in-law noticed my arrival and invited me into the living room. As expected, my ex-husband was sulking, but a stern word from his father made him reluctantly lower his head. She mentioned that because you only do what you want, her life is in shambles. My father-in-law chastised him. That's when I revealed that I had sought legal advice regarding his constant threats of divorce, which could be deemed emotional abuse. My ex-husband's face drained of color upon hearing this. After some negotiation, we reached an agreement. He would cover the initial costs of the new car and the expenses related to retracting the theft report, with my father-in-law making up the difference. As I was leaving, my mother-in-law expressed regret, saying, "It's a shame we couldn't spend more time together, Cindy." I replied, "If it's all right with you, let's do it again sometime," and took my leave. It turned out that the colleagues my husband had shown off the car to on that fateful day were also present during the accident. They learned everything. The car was registered in my name, we were divorced, and the car had been reported stolen. Gossip spread through his workplace, and he became the subject of ridicule behind his back. Around this time, there was talk of a transfer, which he eagerly accepted due to discomfort in his current role. However, it turned out to be more of a demotion, sending him to a rural area. Expecting convenience stores and laundromats for daily needs, he found nothing nearby. The nearest supermarket was a 30-minute drive away, and there were no laundromats in sight. Recently, Catherine, who had invited me for a meal, expressed hesitancy about asking him how he was managing household chores. She was pleasantly surprised when I agreed to meet her, and now we've developed a close friendship. I'm content now. I've purchased a new car within my budget and enjoy solo trips.